Igshan Davids, the fall of Cape Town's most feared gang boss. For years, Igshan Davids was one of the most feared figures in Cape Town's underworld. His name was spoken in hushed tones, a symbol of power and violence in the city's gang-ridden streets. As an alleged gang boss, he controlled large portions of the drug trade, wielding influence that stretched from the Cape Flats to high-ranking officials. He was more than just a street enforcer. He was a strategist, someone who knew how to play the game at the highest levels. His operations were well organized, his crew fiercely loyal, and his enemies often ended up either dead or too scared to fight back. But the power he built came at a cost, and every move he made put a bigger target on his back. The Cape Flats, already drowning in gang warfare, became an even deadlier battleground under his reign. He thrived in a system where fear dictated survival, but even the strongest empires eventually fall. For Davids, the streets that once made him powerful would ultimately be the same streets that took him down. His life was a testament to the brutal reality of crime. There are no happy endings. And when his time came, it came fast, violent, and final. Igshan Davids didn't start as a king. He earned that title through blood and strategy. Like many who rise to power in the Cape Flats, his early years were spent navigating a world where survival meant either joining a gang or becoming a victim of one. He understood this reality early, using his sharp instincts and ruthless nature to climb the ranks. As a young gangster, he learned that respect was taken, not given. The more violent and unpredictable he became, the more fear he commanded. His influence grew rapidly as he expanded his grip on drug distribution, extortion, and illegal weapons trade. Unlike some gangsters who thrived on chaos, Davids was calculated. He ran his empire like a business, ensuring loyalty through both incentives and brutal punishments. He had the intelligence to avoid unnecessary conflicts, but when war was inevitable, he struck first and without mercy. His network expanded beyond street-level crime, reaching corrupt officials who protected his operations in exchange for hefty payoffs. But the higher he climbed, the more dangerous his enemies became. And in a world where power shifts overnight, he was constantly one wrong move away from his downfall. Davids didn't just operate in the Cape Flats. He owned it, at least in the eyes of those under his rule. His gang's reach extended into neighborhoods where law enforcement barely had control. Police raids were frequent, but convictions were rare, a testament to his ability to manipulate the system. He had a reputation for handling problems himself, often seen at the center of violent disputes rather than hiding behind his men. His hands were dirty, and he didn't care. Power, after all, was about control. Rivals who challenged him quickly realized that survival meant either submitting or disappearing entirely. Assassinations, kidnappings, and public executions were all part of his playbook, reinforcing his dominance. But while his empire thrived, his list of enemies grew longer by the day. Other gangs saw him as an obstacle, a force too powerful to ignore. Law enforcement, pressured by the public, started turning up the heat, making him a high-priority target. And as history has shown, when the system finally decides to take down a kingpin, it's only a matter of time before everything crumbles. The police had tried to bring Igshan Davids down many times, but he always found a way out. Some believed it was due to corruption, while others argued that fear kept witnesses from speaking against him. Regardless of the reason, he remained untouchable for years, slipping through the cracks of South Africa's fragile justice system. Arrests were made, but charges never seemed to stick. Either evidence disappeared, or key witnesses refused to testify. It was clear that Davids had built more than just a criminal empire. He had influence where it mattered most, but the more he evaded justice, the more determined his enemies became. Rival gangs, tired of living under his shadow, began plotting his downfall. The police, under pressure to clean up the streets, intensified their crackdown, leading to a series of high-profile arrests in his organization. Slowly, the walls were closing in, and Davids found himself running out of allies. He had built a life where fear ruled everything, but as history has shown, fear is only powerful until someone decides they have nothing left to lose. And in 2017, someone finally made that decision. On a quiet evening in 2017, Igshan David's reign came to an abrupt and bloody end. He was gunned down in a calculated hit, shot multiple times in what was clearly an execution. The attack was swift, precise, and left no room for survival. Witnesses reported hearing rapid gunfire before seeing his lifeless body slump to the ground. There was no dramatic escape, no final stand, just a cold, efficient elimination of one of Cape Town's most feared men. The streets, for a moment, fell silent as news of his death spread like wildfire. Some celebrated, believing that his death would bring peace to the Cape Flats. Others mourned, seeing him as a necessary evil who kept order in an otherwise lawless world. But in the world of crime, a fallen king is never the end of the story. His death only created a vacuum, one that would soon be filled by others just as ruthless. And for Cape Town, the cycle of violence continued, unfazed by the death of one man. The assassination of Igshan Davids sent shockwaves through the Cape Flats. Almost overnight, the delicate balance of power in the underworld was shattered. His death wasn't just a hit on a single man, it was the erasure of an entire system that he had built. Rival gangs saw this as an opportunity, each one scrambling to claim the territory he left behind. In the days following his murder, an eerie silence covered the streets, but it was the calm before an inevitable storm. As expected, violence erupted almost immediately, with shootouts becoming a nightly occurrence. Police flooded the area in an attempt to control the chaos, but it was like trying to stop a tidal wave with a bucket. Some of David's most trusted lieutenants were either killed or fled in fear of becoming the next target. Others attempted to keep the empire intact, but without their leader, the operation quickly started to crumble. Authorities viewed his death as a victory, but they knew better than to assume the war was over. In reality, it was only the beginning of the next chapter in Cape Town's endless gang conflict. And as history has shown, power vacuums in the criminal underworld are rarely left unfilled for long. The circumstances surrounding Igshan David's murder were as mysterious as they were brutal. In the world of organized crime, assassinations are rarely random. Someone somewhere had issued the order. Theories quickly began circulating, each more compelling than the last. Some believed it was a rival gang leader making a power move, hoping to take control of David's lucrative drug empire. Others pointed to corrupt police officers who had long seen him as a threat, but couldn't take him down legally. There were also whispers that his own men had turned on him, seeing him as a liability rather than an asset. In the underworld, loyalty is fleeting, and betrayal is often the price of survival. His death was methodical, carried out by professionals who knew exactly what they were doing. Whoever pulled the trigger wasn't looking for a warning shot, they were making a statement. But despite endless speculation, the truth remained buried beneath layers of fear, silence, and corruption. And just like many assassinations before his, the identity of those responsible would likely never be known. With David's gone, the Cape Flats descended into chaos as gangs fought to fill the void he left behind. It was an all-out war, with alliances shifting daily and betrayals becoming routine. Turf that had been under his control was now a battlefield, with multiple factions vying for dominance. Shootings became more frequent, and the once organized structure of crime began to splinter into reckless violence. Those who had once worked under David's either aligned with new leaders or found themselves eliminated. The police, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the bloodshed, struggled to contain the war. Residents of the Cape Flats, already accustomed to gang violence, now lived in even greater fear. Some speculated that David's death had made things worse. Without his brutal control, anarchy took over. The new leaders lacked his strategic mind, and the result was a chaotic and unpredictable criminal landscape. The body count continued to rise, but one thing remained certain. Cape Town's gang problem wasn't going anywhere. And just like Davids himself, those who stepped up to replace him would eventually meet the same fate. Despite his violent end, Igshan Davids left behind a complex and controversial legacy. To some, he was a ruthless criminal who brought nothing but destruction to the Cape Flats. His name was synonymous with drug trafficking, extortion, and murder, an example of how crime could consume a person completely. But to others, he was a necessary force, a man who, for all his brutality, maintained a form of order. Under his rule, the gangs operated with structure, and the violence, while ever present, was controlled. His leadership ensured that certain rules were followed, preventing complete lawlessness. When he was taken out, that fragile order collapsed, leaving the streets in disarray. Some former associates described him as a man of contradictions, cold and violent, but also fiercely loyal to those he trusted. Others saw him as nothing more than a cautionary tale, proof that no one, no matter how powerful, is untouchable. His rise and fall mirrored that of many gangsters before him, reinforcing the brutal reality of the lifestyle. And in the end, he became another statistic in the never-ending cycle of crime and retribution. Igshan David's story is just one of many in the long and bloody history of Cape Town's gang wars. His death, like those before him, changed nothing. The machine of crime kept moving, indifferent to the lives lost along the way. New leaders emerged, new factions formed, and the endless cycle of power, violence, and revenge continued. The Cape Flats remained a war zone where survival depended on who had the most money, the most weapons, and the least mercy. Police crackdowns, mass arrests, and community efforts made little impact in stopping the bloodshed. The allure of fast money and power kept fueling the next generation of criminals, eager to carve out their own legacy. For every fallen gangster, another one was waiting in the shadows, ready to take their place. Davids had built an empire through fear, but fear is never permanent. It shifts, moves, and eventually turns on its master. His story is a testament to the harsh reality of organized crime. There are no legends, only cautionary tales. And as long as poverty, corruption, and violence remain, there will always be another Igshan Davids waiting to rise and eventually fall. Igshan David's life and death reflect the harsh reality of crime in Cape Town. His rise to power was built on violence and fear, but his fall was just as brutal and inevitable. His story, like many before and after him, is a grim reminder that in the underworld, no one is untouchable. The Cape Flats remains locked in a cycle of crime where leaders come and go, but the violence never truly ends.